Hello. Hi, Ty. Thanks for being with us. And today we're going to talk about AI agents and how to secure their identity and this unique change that we are witnessing in our infrastructure and how to tackle it. Maybe I'll start by presenting few slides, and the first one will be about introduction. So one second. All right. So for those who don't know me, my name is Itamar Apelblat. I'm the co-founder and CEO of Token Security. We're a company in the identity security space, securing your agentic AI identities and also your non-human identities. And I will let Ty introduce himself as well.
Thanks, Itamar. I'm Ty Sbano, Chief Information Security Officer at Webflow. I've been in the role for about 2 months now, but I've been in information security for the past 20 years. I've been a CISO 3 times. I've seen this wonderful world of change from Web 1.0 to pre-Web 1.0 to Web 2.0 with mobile and Web 3, and now our AI native experiences. And so I'm really looking forward to this chat with you today.
Yeah, me too. And we were trying to set it up for a while now. I was really waiting to have a conversation with you, Ty, because I think that you are for sure one of the most forward thinking and tech savvy security leaders that I know. And I'm sure that we're going to learn a lot about your also journey in adopting AI in all different companies, wearing different hats. So really excited for today.
Thanks.
Um, before we will jump into the discussion, um, I just wanted to cover some of the topics from today's conversation. So we're going to cover in today's conversation the difference between action-based permissioning into intent-based. How does it look like? Why do we need to have this change? We're going to give some practical examples about how to set some guardrails around your AI agents and what's the risk around those identities and access of those AI agents, and some practical steps that you can take and to prepare in order to really support this AI journey. Because what we see today, and when I'm speaking with a lot of security leaders, is that it's inevitable that this is going to transform our enterprise and our IT. We see security leaders being asked by their CEO, by their board members to adopt AI, and AI agents is such a big piece of it. So in today's conversation, we're going to cover all of those different angles of how to do that in a secure way and what should we focus when it comes to the identity of those agents. And maybe before we will just jump into the discussion, just let's have some definitions about what is even AI agents, right? And what's the difference between securing their identity to securing historical identities like human and workload identities. So, first of all, about the definition of AI agents. So, we have here um, a service that has autonomy, it's goal oriented, it has instructions and goals. I like to separate between the two because instructions are how to do some of the things and what to think about, and goal is more high level agenda that the agent has. Then it could either be invoked by people or continuously take some interaction, and it has tools, different applications and services that the agent is interacting with in order to provide value. And obviously, it's leveraging LLM and Gen AI models in order to take those actions and continuously. And what's interesting about this type of identity is that historically we had human and machine. So human identities, their entire permissions and scoping was defined by their role in the organization, right? And they were taking actions in a very low scale. Then we have machine identities that are continuously taking actions, but by looking in the past, it's very easy to define what are they going to do in the future, because they are deterministic. So it was much easier to scope their permissions. Agent identities is a bit of a combination of the both, right? On one hand, it has the flexibility and creativity of humans to take actions in a bit of unpredictable way, but at the same time, it can do that in continuously and in scale. And that's why, in our perspective, you need to really address this new class of identities, and that will be a big portion of today's conversation. So maybe I'll remove the slides now and let's start the conversation. So, Ty, when today, when you think about identity first, when it comes to securing AI, how do you think about um, tackling security AI with identity first perspective? What does identity first security mean in this context, and how its principles need to adapt when the user is actually in an AI agent and not just a human?
It's a big question. I'll take us a roundabout way, but I think for the most part, we've all built identity on the traditional paradigm of identity access management. And so the persona of an individual is mapped one-to-one typically, right? Unless you're violating principles like you're sharing credentials, you're sharing an account. Hey, does that happen in startup land? Absolutely. We've seen it many times over. That's where cost-cutting measures come in. People are sharing MFA tokens. And so, if you don't follow the foundations of good authentication, well, this is only going to make it harder, right? And so I think as we get into the agentic world, it's an extension of your identity. And so the way I like to think about this is, I think GitHub did a really good job with kind of the access token model. There's GitHub classic tokens, and then there's fine-grained access tokens. So just even the naming convention of like, hey, you know what the classic flavor is? Overscope tokens that likely have been compromised in many, many breaches. But in the reality of it, that's how we all thought about identity. And so creating an API key for the Web 2.0 world, or even Web 3, like we created a lot of identities saying, this is me, I've authorized it, I've done the step-up auth, generated, I'm the only one that gets to see it once, and then I use it, and I can never recover it again. And if I need a new one, I just have to replace it through this workflow again. Current state, what I really appreciate is fine-grained access tokens for GitHub allows you to really narrow the scope. What should I be authorizing? And so from a security practitioner standpoint, I think this is where, I kind of look to you too. We have to change and evolve our way of thinking and looking at classic versus fine grained. So even role-based access controls are evolving. Like, what do you see in the nature of tools technology? Because I don't think it's as well understood today, because our identity is only going to expand further with this magic word, agentic, right?
Yeah. No, that's an interesting topic, right? How do we manage identities and move into fine-grained rollback-based access, and allowing agents to be much more focused on a specific task, specific mission. And what we see today actually is the exact opposite. We see a lot of organizations have these pseudo agents. They're taking that can do basically everything. And now they're trying to start to think, okay, how can I narrow it down? What is a fine-grained access management when it comes to an identity that is not very deterministic, and not and it's much harder to define what is a legit action that they will do and what is not. So maybe I'm curious to hear from your perspective, um, what 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 do you think we should change now between AI agents, identities? What other layers should we add now into those the authorization mechanisms that we're already aware of?
I think this is where we have to evolve. And so I think identity access management, the way we used to look at it, or maybe the way many of us still look at it, is transactional. Itamar did this, he logged in, and Itamar did that. Done and done. It's just a record, it's a log. And so, there was this older world that never really maybe it took off in some companies and they're very dedicated to user behavior analytics, but I actually think we're trending back towards that line. And so the current state that I look at is my lens becomes more motivation. So we start thinking about intent, we start thinking about context, and then we think about causality. And so a lot of that changes the way we're looking at the world. And so the way I break this down is like, look at any search engine from back in the day. What did you search for? And it's not too much of a detailed path, but it's just like you requested this and this output came out. Now we should start thinking about more in that frame of, well, why are you asking that question? I, as an internal employee, maybe want to find out, what is the bonus structure going to look like for everyone at the company? And we just got this great search engine tool that connects all of our SaaS applications. And maybe I can get to that, but it depends. How did IT set it up, or how did IT plus security set it up? How did the engineers scope it? And many of the early tools that we see in this space from an agentic standpoint are service accounts. And so while that service account may be overly permissioned, it can scan every document. It can see every document. It can render and unfurl, and you can maybe get an early summary and a little bit of a preview, and you can eyeball it and say, maybe I see data. But when you click it, what we expect is kind of that intent is now shifting back to the user to say, do you have permissions to see this data? My hope, we honor those permissions there, and it doesn't ride the backbone of that agent. Now, I think there's so many use cases and examples that I've gone through that give me heartache, and I'll give you one specifically. Code flow and Git flow, just generally how we think about shipping code. What I appreciate is a lot of augmented or co-assisted or co-piloted engineers that are going to be able to move faster, audit their code more effectively, ship faster, and then security will also need to be AI assisted as well. But what I don't appreciate is the fact that myself as a user and my avatar or my agentic partner, virtual Ty, well, Ty commits the PR, virtual Ty approves the PR. Guess what? That two-person rule is being honored because it's two different identities in theory, but in practice, it could be the same. And so these controls that we used to look at before may not be the same way we can look at them today, because that extension of identity around that motivation, like if you looked at an audit and your auditor looked at it, they say, cool, it was Ty, and then it was Ty's bot, auto Ty, whatever you want to call it, right? Like this other persona. They may not realize it because the name is slightly different, but it's me. It's still me. It's always been me. And so I think that's the part where in the reality of it, the motivation for me to bypass or force merge or get code in that may be malicious, hopefully there's enough of the sort of layered structure when we think about controls and touch points that I shouldn't be able to do that. But in the reality of smaller shops, or effectively people that have been experimenting with AI very quickly, likely this has been happening and you may not even realize it because it's like, oh, that wasn't even our intent to do that maliciously. It's just how the agent worked.
Yeah, that's very interesting. I do think that as we're adopting new agents, we need to rethink about a lot of business processes that we have in general, right? Like, because leveraging agents really change some of exactly like you shared, compliance framework, different restriction and guardrails that we want to have, and we need to rethink about it. I'm curious because you brought up an interesting point. Do you see today? I can share that we see a lot of agents that running on behalf of a person, but many times leveraging that person identity. And one of the biggest challenges is exactly that, is separating between my AI agents that running on behalf of myself and my own identity, just for traceability and security perspective. But then it also brings some challenges around user experience. My agent took an action and approved this commit. Should it write the agent name or myself, or what? How should we trace it? So I'm curious, when you think about the same example that you just brought up. So you really see it as extension of yourself or a new type of identity, and how do you think that looking at it is what type of risk it's going to bring to us.
I think there's a lot of knowns that we understand well, is that front door authentication, our traditional logs are going to do just that. It's going to identify me as a different persona. Hopefully the UUID or however that unique identifier is on the back end, it should still be me. But again, not every system, not every SaaS application, not every SCIM integration, not every SSO implementation is going to honor it that way. And so I think this is where, where you log in with a provider, like a provider provides an authentication scheme. These are things that, I don't think we have a downstream effect, because as we're creating authentication for that timeline, we're creating authentication, for our mobile devices, and we're building into this identity that is meant to be a human, not meant to be an agentic workflow that is working outside the confines of the work hours. And also, I think the struggle, I think we did an okay job in identity access management when it came to like non-human travel, right? But the hard part is, well, my token could be running on a service or a server or a service provider that's authorized, and it doesn't seem human, but it's a token. It's different. It's different than my identity. I think Agentic is going to take that step up with this MCP server that's sitting out there. And now we also have the hard play with prompt injection and new attack vectors that, again, client server architecture, foundational thought process is still there, but we're moving trust further towards the server. And so that is good, but I'm representing myself as the client. So now we've just created a new attack vector, because it's like this agent in the middle, if you will.
Yeah, that's interesting, and I think that for sure chaining the intent along the way between your client to the server, and many times we see even a multi-agents ecosystem, right? So getting back to the intent question is becoming very complex when you have an agent that's serving few different consumers, right? And you want to ask, hey, the agent can actually take this action, right? Like it's okay for them to search in these files and respond to this answer, but does Ty that initiate and activate this agent has the access and the permissions to do that? And that's why we need to connect here few different pieces and chain them together in order to make a decision. Should I allow this action? Is it a legitimate action to perform by this agent, or we see here something suspicious or under? Because basically, a lot of our identity and access management concepts are breaking down by putting those agents that are being serving a lot of different people, because they are connected to those tools and have a pretty wide today permissions in those tools, right?
This is the reality. This is the reality we're facing, Itamar, and maybe the inspiration for token security, right?
Yeah, absolutely. I think you've been in a journey now with multiple companies in adopting AI. What and what have been the most interesting challenges that you experience in this journey of adopting AI? Do you see different perspective in different types of organization? And what advice do you have for other security leaders that are in your position?
Yeah, it's a very unique question, in the grand scheme of my timeline, right? Like, just spent 3.5 years at Vercel, and I had a wider range of scope just because I started earlier with the company and we built a lot of things. So my span of control included IT. And so as a security leader, now currently at Webflow, I'm dedicated to security and trust and safety. I don't own IT. I have partners in IT. I have partners in legal, but it's a very different experience. And also at the same time, I worked at Vercel, where we went from creating a developer cloud to an AI cloud. And so on that journey, we created AI native tools. Part of the impetus for change is, like, if you look at the world, it was AI or die. Like, if you don't AI now, like, when are you going to AI? And if you don't, then you might not make it. And so I think that instilled focus was a big part of it. And so as I wore the hat of IT, and then I also wore the one of security, it's like I put them on together, and I'm also like, okay, I guess we got to think about privacy. there were certain elements that I had to look at for, a lot of SaaS providers that were providing these solutions. And so for me, the conversation started at a very simple place: our risk modeling and our threat modeling and our understanding as a team. Where are we comfortable having all of these connectors and all of this visibility? And so as an organization, what are the secrets that you're protecting, and what is yours for all of your infrastructure? And if you have all these customers, what are their secrets? What's the confidential data that you need to protect? And so for me, it was breaking down and saying, all right, what I'm not comfortable with is a lot of this early play into AI, and we don't know where their model is. We don't know what model it is. We don't know where they're hosting it. It's not described well in any of the GDPR experience because everyone's figuring it out as they go. And so because of that iteration velocity, it was hard to actually sit down with the early sales motions and technical engineers that were doing the figuring it out themselves. And so for me, it started with that team discussion. We narrowed the path. We said, okay, we're going to have to self-host our own model. Not every SaaS player that's offering AI does that. We're going to have to make sure we use our own API keys. We got to bring our own key, or we have to use our own key, or you have to let us purchase a key or something unique that we're not just part of this noisy neighbor experience. And another part of that is we have to have the right contractual expectations. All of our vendor management doesn't go out the window because AI is here. I will say I am observing a lot of AI fast tracks and a lot of AI enablement because people want to live in that mindset that it's either AI or die right now. And so I think on that journey, it was a lot of experimentation and a lot of understanding to say, okay, if we choose these providers, what do we do when something goes wrong? Can you untrain? Can you unthink? Can you remove the history of that chat? Those are things that you learn through this process. And I would say now in later 2025, as I'm part of Webflow, I'm taking a lot of that experience into a team that has been experimenting. And I think my thoughts of the basis of them still remain the same. And so the question that I would ask to a lot of professionals that are working on the same thing, how many models, how much inference data, how much of your business do you want leaking to a lot of these AI providers? And is it going to be two dudes in a van at a startup that's really cool and they're going to change the world? Or is it one of the larger players that has already been established? And so OpenAI, Claude, like Anthropic, and there are other providers that are riding the backbone of trusted infrastructure, and they're not just like freestyling every day and changing that model. And so I think we have a better understanding as a community. I think we have a better understanding as teams, but I think the challenge is the business motion and some of the fear, uncertainty, and doubt of the future. If we do not change our ways and evolve now, how do we make sure that we stay competitive? And so that is the balance of security. If we're the most secure ever, guess what? We're probably not doing a lot of business. Yeah. If we're the least secure ever, we may be doing so much business, but something bad may happen and then we're not doing any business. And so that risk tolerance for each team is super important to balance out. And I think that's what I'd offer as a recommendation for a lot of our practitioners here today on the chat with us.
Mm-hmm. That's interesting. And one of the interesting phenomena that we see is that one of the first adopters of agents and AI technologies are also coming from security side, right? Even the security team is asking themselves, okay, how can we be ahead of the game? How can we keep innovate, allow business, like being business enablers, but also us as a department, how can we be more effective? So we see a lot of AI adoption also from the security side. I'm curious if in your experience, did you also leverage agents in your own ecosystem in order to operate faster and to support some use cases internally?
I think it's important to meet the team and the organization where they're at, because if a team is scaling with AI, agentic solutions, augmented AI development, like my big thing has always been work where everyone's working. If we have a single watering hole, we should all be drinking from it. The challenge of security is we think we're special. Maybe we are, maybe we're not. But I think the thing that we think about is confidentiality, and it's not always we get to share everything, nor do we want everyone to have access to the same data sets. And so it's a fine balance. I would prefer to build into the existing tools. And so, if you're using a lot of things like cursor rules are kind of the path forward. And I actually just had this great discussion with one of our leaders at Webflow, Ankit, who has been running our AppSec program for 3 years. And, we're having a foundational discussion of secure coding guidance. And it's like, okay, I appreciate that we're documenting it. Like, this feels like a 10-year-old thing that we used to do back in the day, because BSIM and OpenSAM said have secure coding guidance, and PCI recommend, like, all these frameworks and all of these things that told us that this is good. Well, it's good for inference. It's good for if someone's searching for the answer. I'm so for that. But in the reality, where we're building, where we're developing, where we're actually going to enable the engineer to get context and understanding, as opposed to have to prompt to get context, it's just built into the workflow. On the back end of it, yes, my team is absolutely experimenting now. My last team also experimenting, because I think it's very exciting to keep that narrative and that community and connection up, because we're all figuring this out together. I think that's one thing that we have to do a better job of, maybe in the Bay Area, but in general, I find Bay Area to be very open.
Mm-hmm.
It's sharing security practices, sharing which vendor is doing well or which vendor is doing you very bad. And this technology will allow us to move faster and enable our business to go. While some people could say, well, you know what, that's trade secret, you can't let people know, we should keep it confidential. I go, protecting the business or doing trust and safety and trying to stop bad actors from getting in, that's good for all of us to share that information. And so I think that's always been the struggle. It's like kind of a whisper net or a Slack group that you may not be in, but it is part of the experience where I think we have to share with each other as we keep growing. And that way we can all make these effective decisions. And if we get these early indicators, we also raise the flag quickly to make sure that we can act effectively, because that is a big part of it. It's not if you're going to have an incident, it's when you're going to have an incident, and how you get notified of it and how you actually operate your incident response processes.
Yeah. I totally agree with you. And I think that we do see, especially in the Bay Area, much more openness to talk about challenges and how to address them, and not just keep everything close to the chest. And when we talk with different leaders, what we see that, and I'm curious what's your take on that, but in their AI journey, they are still in a place of trying to understand what do we have, how the organization is leveraging AI. And because the pace of innovation is so fast, it keeps on changing. So I think that right now, in the maturity level for many organizations, is still even trying to understand what type of AI services are we using. Do we have shadow AI? Do we have even policies of how we want to manage different AI services and AI agent? Do you think that this is the first step, is visibility into what do we even have as an organization, or should we first block the organization from adopting and from trying out different technologies, and only when we'll have an answer? No, for the second.
Absolutely not. Should you stop your organization from innovating?
Yeah.
Like, to me, this is always the narrative of like the public companies I used to work at, where we created an innovation lab, and it's exciting that they get to experiment within certain parameters or environments. But what that states to me is that no one else is allowed to innovate. And sometimes that was the perception of people. Like, where do we get to experiment if they're in the lab and they get this and they get that? I think the reality has to be everyone needs to experiment. Everyone needs to ship. Everyone needs to have some contextual opportunity. Now, having good guidance has been a big play for the past 2 years. And I think this is where it's been a little bit tough as a practitioner to say, do we trust that these guardrails work? They're not guardrails, they're guidance. And so unless we're putting in technical controls to maybe reduce some of the risk, like, I totally get to block certain models. Maybe as a company that originates in the US, you may not want to honor the use of AI models from an entity in another government or another country, right? Like, I'm not going to get into the specifics there, because I think every place has to understand their threat model differently. But, I actually have been thinking about this MIT study that was done by Nanda a lot, and I'm going to drop it in the chat. I hope you've heard this headline, but, the big thing for me, the following announcement will be displayed to your audience. Cool, making sure I know how to use BrightHire. But for the most part, 95% 95% of all of this AI experimentation is failing. And so having an inventory would be great. I think it's a very important part of any practice. Let it be application security, let it be mobile security, let it be API engineering, right? Like having an inventory of what you know to be true in your environment gives you a better sense of how to protect it. What is your attack surface? And so all these MCP endpoints and agents running around your environment, and sometimes hybrid, a little bit in, maybe it's a personal account and a little bit out, but those are parts of it. But if 95% of these experiments are failing, how many teams are effectively running their procurement processes as well as their life cycling? And I will say we're probably all 50-50, in the grand scheme of how many people set up new stuff, get excited, use a tool once or twice, but it doesn't fit their workflow, doesn't fit their personality. The design system sucks. The UI is not great. It's not intuitive. And guess what? How many people cancel that account?
Yeah.
How many people delete all the data? How many request for the third party to delete all their data as part of the procurement flow to make sure you're offboarding effectively? And so to your point, yes, you should have an inventory, but I think the hard part is instilling the right understanding and ownership as owners of a company that have equitable gains and losses that go with the success and failures of the org. And so as part of that, we should be responsible owners when it comes to AI. It's not just these providers that are giving to us. We as practitioners that are giving our identity out need to also make sure we're managing what that campground or what your attack surface looks like too.
Yeah, I think that's interesting because life cycle management for AI agents is something that I haven't seen as top of the conversation, but we really need to think about. So today for our human identities, we have processes, right, of onboarding,
For
uh,
sure.
join, mover, leaver, right, offboarding. For machine identities, it's getting a bit more complicated, but for AI agents, it's even more interesting. And because of this, as you shared, because of this urge to adopt and innovate and test different technologies, we see a lot of those um, agents that are not even being used anymore. We don't know who is the owners, who is accountable. They're still connected to some of our services. So the processes around lifecycle management for agents is, in my perspective, after gaining visibility, is probably the most challenging one, especially the piece about accountability and ownership. And it's not just from security perspective, but even from operational perspective, right? You have an agent starting to go wrong. Who should I speak with? Who is in charge of that? Who is accountable? How should we collaborate on that? How the security team give also tools to the agent builders to work on those agents and support them without knowing who is accountable for those agents. So I think that accountability, ownership is so much important, and this is not just a tool or a product, it's also an organization of how we, the culture of the organization that needs to address this. And the, the last thing, the last challenge that we see is more from the access management perspective. And this is how do I define and give the agent builders also a solution to plan what are the scoping, the permissions that these
Yep.
agents actually need when they're not the security practitioners and they don't necessarily understand when I connected this agent to Salesforce, this and that can happen, and this put this data at risk. So I think that to break it down, there are three layers of challenges when it comes to adoption of AI. The first one is discovery, visibility into them. The second is about lifecycle management and processes around AI agents. And the third is defining the access management, managing it, and creating a strong enough restrictions for this agent. Um, what do you think about compliance? Do you see right now any do you see compliance as uh, driving us forward when it comes to adoption of agents, or or it's a bit more behind? Did you see any interesting requirements on that perspective?
I think this is where ISO is coming into play, ISO 42001 2023. And so this is a relatively new framework. I've started it once, I'm starting it again in my shop. And so, I think I want to go through a full swing to get really based in understanding. But what I see a lot of this is around responsible and trustworthy sort of effectiveness of AI systems. So we're taking ISO 27001, we're now adding a little slap on for AI. Compliance, let's be real. If you're compliant, that's great. It should lead to compliance. But if you're doing really good security, hopefully you're compliant. But in the reality, great security doesn't always mean compliance, because you're focused on the problems, you're focused on actually doing incident response, but hopefully you're following the process, the consistency, because if you've done incident response over and over again, and you're battle tested, and you've got some of those war scars that come with it, a big part of the journey that is developed is understanding the consistency, because when you're in the stuff all the time, it's hard to know that. And so I think this is where the annual audits, the assessments, make sure that you're honoring those practices. TBD, right? Like, I think if this is to be determined, but I will say, like, we're getting down this path right now that I'd rather go back to your prior point, because compliance is compliance. I think it establishes trust, and it makes sure that we have the right sort of front-facing expectations for customers that kind of summarize it in a certification through an independent body. But on the back end, I actually think user access reviews need to evolve. And so the way I'm looking at this right now is the concept of a credit score when it comes to spending money versus the concept of your AI agent score, your avatar score. Our personal lives as well as our professional lives are going to be two different things. They'll continue to kind of overlay into each other, because again, how many shops have you been in where you bring your GitHub profile? You don't create a new one because you want to bring your brand. And so we've already seen a little bit of this overlap and connection. And so what I'm starting to think that's needed is individuals need to be better educated and empowered to understand all of this authorization that they're giving, all of these places where they're transacting. What this framework looks like, I don't know. These are things that I kind of think about and noodle on, but I've been thinking about it for the past year. And I think we're coming to a place where individuals will need to understand and audit themselves consistently to ensure that the actions that are being taken on their behalf will have a record, as well as awareness for them to say yes or no, or maybe not. But if we rely on the old model, the way it worked was like, you as my people manager, like if you're my manager, you would review all the systems I need access to. And then you're going to go, Ty, do you really need this? And I'm going to go, I don't even know what that is. And then you're like, all right, let's strike it off. And next thing you know, you're like, oh yeah, you can't do your job because it was titled wrong. Or it's an app that you always needed. And so those are the things that I think are kind of tricky, is the context to a lot of the authentication and authorization that's going to happen in this future state of, I'm not manually doing it myself. I'm not recollecting it in my brain. Maybe I set up a workflow and it runs every 3 months and I forget about it. And then I go, oh shit, what is that? Right.
Yeah. That's interesting. I think that basically our since every person gonna have multiple agents, right? So an organization gonna have so many new AI agents and workflow that's running around. I think that our job description is a bit adapting and changing, and we are becoming agents managers. And I didn't think about what you said from the individual perspective of how to be an AI agent manager that is actually doing it in a responsible way, and how us as a security leaders giving these tools to the managers of those agents to actually um, be accountable and responsible to how our AI agents is running.
Sure.
I know, yeah. So I know that we don't have a lot of time, and I wanted to also refer to some of the questions that brought up here in the Q&A. So um, the first question is, how do we? Wait. So The agents act on behalf of users. I understand in the agentic AI system, the agents, for it to learn, they access other agents, which belongs to different user. Do we need to be concerned about this, or I'm wrong about my understanding that the agents can read other agents' result? So basically, in other words, it's how do we manage agents when one user agent is interacting with another agent? How do we manage their permissions to the data, and can they read from each other? What do you
Yeah.
think?
Great question, Ramesh. I think this is a tough one. It depends. Like how did you set up your architecture? How is your auth N, auth Z model, authentication and authorization model? But again, if one agent is in a system or an MCP, and as part of that MCP, they all share the same data set, and whatever you're inferring or you're prompting is going to be part of the general data set, like that is different than if it's an individual MCP, individual database, isolated primitives. And so I think this is the part where it's a lot of unknown until you get into it. But if we just take a step back and look at the Samsung scenario from the early times of our AI journey, uploading your private code base to a semi-private, not really private, knowledge set will leak everywhere. And so what you're sharing as context is very, very important to understand. This is the agency we're talking about. If you have no idea what's going to happen on the back end, guess what? You probably don't want to put in sensitive data. You probably don't want to put in your SSN. You don't want to put in your credit card numbers. You don't want to transact through this thing because you don't know how it's going to bleed out. And so, when we look at our current lives today, this is no different than the apps that we install on our phone, the Chrome plugins that we use on our browser. These are things that can talk, scrape, gather information, get maliciously compromised, and the same can be said for a lot of these services that sit out there. And this word MCP, again, is just another shift of the way we think about access. And so I don't know. I look at this one as it really just depends. I don't know, Itamar, if you think about it a little bit differently or not.
No, I completely agree with you. It depends, and it's all about contents and content. And because we only have 2 more minutes, so maybe I will also want to, because there's an interesting question here. So most organizations already have mature IAM and zero trust framework. How would intent-based permissions integrate with those systems without really restructuring and redesigning those framework? Do you have a take on that? I'll
I
share
do.
mine.
Luckily, I spent 4 years in data analytics, and I've gotten pretty close to the understanding of ETL and fast data, not just big data. And so, a big part of what we've done as security teams is we've created massive silos of data. Typically, it's in a seam, and so if you have this data in there, likely what you're going to want to do is enrich it. So, how do you enrich this information with context? Luckily, the agents themselves are going to have some of that context. The MCP servers are going to have that context, but your SaaS provider should have this integration with a connector. And that would be my hope and request to a lot of the providers out there that are building these solutions, that they're able to generate the information so then the team can enrich it natively. And so my hope is you don't have to do a total redesign. If you do, like your identity access management, your zero trust framework was probably not set up the right way. But if you've built a SIEM effectively, your team understands how to do this work. It's now looking at the data in a slightly different way. And so my recommendation is evolving your existing security team to work more with your data team to make sure that they're empowered to look at your world the right way.
Yeah, I completely agree with you, and I think it's a shared responsibility with the SaaS providers, and it's adding a new layer of data into those authentication authorization interactions. So we are out of time. Ty, I want to say thank you. This was a fascinating conversation, and I really enjoyed it. And from the question, I see that also others. So thank you so much.
Thank you for having me. You know, we've done this over coffee and tea and matchas before, but it's first time getting in front of a camera, but it was a pleasure. It's always easy to spend 45 minutes or an hour with you, Itamar. I think you're working on a lot of great technology and understanding to enable people to really understand kind of the non-human identity space and landscape, which is really just the agentic world that we're talking about today. So that extension, I think it's, again, evolve the mindset a little bit. Don't flip the table in your current organization. Start with that inventory, start understanding how your company is evolving your threat model, and then make sure your security team is also evolving with it. But don't just say no, say, how are we going to do it?
Love it. Love it. All right. Thank you so much. Thanks everyone for coming. Bye-bye.